So we have a new panel, a little bit of changing around, and we've been joined by Hazel here. And I don't suppose I need to introduce Mark and Louise, given they've been talking for a fair while now, but we've not let them off the hook yet. So we've sort of been walking through the process. We've talked about marketing, and I think we've already touched on the fact that many authors, especially independent authors, do get quite heavily involved in the business side of independent publishing. As we talked about earlier, if you're a traditionally published author, part of the deal with your publisher is that they take care of much of that for you. As an independent author, it's down to you to decide what and how you deal with the business side. And so that's what we're going to talk about here, is in terms of managing the creative versus the business side, how you can outsource some of that work, and actually what elements of it do authors enjoy. So I'm going to start with Mark. So tell us, what elements of the business side of writing, the finance, the sort of managing your accounts, the legal, the tax things, what elements of those do you get involved in?
All of them, really. I suppose I'll outsource stuff that I don't like or I don't have any kind of interest in. I'm terrible with finance and I hate accounts. So I've got an accountant to do that for me, which that was great. Everything else though, and I am kind of the CEO and only employee of my company. So it's me, or I'll send it out to someone if that's something I'd rather do. So
you recognise that the numbers part of it, the finance element, was not really something that you particularly wanted to do as much, and so
I don't want to end up in prison, Darren. No, I'm not interested in it. So I'm quite happy. Amazon's great, and all the platforms are great in providing data in a really easy to digest form. Lots of really great reporting tools. But I'm quite happy to send my receipts and expenses to my accountant at the end of the month, and they just magically take care of it all for me.
And how about for you, Louise? What elements do you enjoy doing? What elements do you outsource of the business?
Well, similar to Mark, I hire an accountant, and again, it's really easy to just sort of download all of your sales data and what have you to be able to just hand it all in a nice, pretty parcel to your accountant, and they'll take care of all of that for you. So that's something that is an investment. I would say it saves you a lot of time doing that, and keeps you out of the soup. So that's good money well spent. I also sort of, it's as I've said elsewhere, I like to try and keep abreast of what's going on in every area of the business. In some areas, I'm more involved than others. So say with the covers, I'm actively involved in creating those covers from scratch. So that's something that I enjoy, though, and that currently capable of doing. So that may change in the future, and it depends, something that you keep abreast of. Things like, I would say, sort of optional add-ons to the business, like public relations. If you wanted to have a relationship with, say, things like print media, or if you wanted to think much longer term and say you're optimistic and you think one day that your books might translate into either TV or film, it tends to be that it's nice if you've had some sort of media presence beyond what you're sort of ordinarily capable of achieving. And it's nice to have a sort of middleman to help you with that sometimes. I mean, it's not to say that you can't do it yourself, because you can create press releases, you can do a lot of that to let people know about the content that's coming through and what you've created. So you can absolutely do it yourself, but it's just in terms of time saving for me, that's something that I would prefer someone else to help me with. So it's just about what you really what you're capable of doing yourself, what you want to devote time to aside from the writing, obviously, and what you want to hire in for help. That's the beauty of it. You can sort of apportion your time like that.
And for you, Hazel, especially balancing the different types of publishing, how do you get involved in the business element?
We all love doing our taxes, don't we? I haven't outsourced my accounts yet. I think that might be on the agenda, having just done my tax return again and reminded myself how painful that is. If I could outsource anything, it would probably be the cleaning of my house, because that's the big thing that gets neglected. I suppose my agent would take a lot of the contractual stuff away from me, which can be hugely time consuming. So she would do a lot of the negotiating in terms of deals with my traditional publishing hat on, and for foreign translations and for TV and film and anything like that. She takes the burden of all of that away from me. And I also had an agent when I was self-published. So if you're looking for an agent, I think you can be represented and still independently publish. I know a lot of authors who have done that. Agents can really, really help, as I say, in terms of some of those rights, foreign rights, particularly foreign translations. And if you do have a very commercial book that may translate very, very well as a TV drama, or the big dream we all have, the Oscar-nominated screenplay, then they can do a phenomenal amount of work for you in that respect as well. But it's a really important discussion, because I think arming yourself with knowledge, knowing a little bit about tax, knowing what might be tax deductible in terms of your expenses. We're obviously all creative people. Number crunching is the last thing we want to be doing, but you do have to really approach this as a business. We are all MDs and CEOs, regardless of which format you're published in. And I think you just owe yourself that, to know some of the facts and to arm yourself with information so that you're giving yourself the best chance to manage that effectively. Yeah.
And how does the agent relationship work? Do you find an agent and you ask them to cover certain things, or does the agent say, here's what I'm going to cover for you, and let's sort of agree that? How does that work?
Well, the agents, in terms of getting an agent in the first place, again, have a look around. Look through the things like the Writers and Artists Yearbook, look at agents who represent authors whom you admire or who are writing in similar genres to you. There's no point submitting your work to an agent who represents children's books if you're writing thrillers, for example. All agents would do pretty much the same thing in terms of doing those contractual negotiations with a publisher, with an editor. So they would hopefully be able to negotiate a better advance for you, a better royalty, and as I say, would then help to perhaps retain some of your rights so that you then have additional income opportunities through foreign translations. And they would be very well placed within the industry to put your book in the right publisher's hands, for example, if that's a route that you're going down. But I suppose it depends on where you're at in terms of your writing and what do you want that agent to do for you. If you're self-published and you're interested in maybe reaching a wider audience even, they might be able to help you with some of that marketing that we were talking about. I know marketing is quite an intimidating thing if you're not confident in it. So your agent might be well placed to help you. Or social media, you might hire a social media consultant who can help take some of that pressure. I know lots of authors who hire social media experts to help give them the strategy that Catherine was talking about. And that really great point. The tool is X, but the strategy is what you need to do in order to elevate that tool and help it work for you. So it's certainly worth reading around those and seeing what might be helpful for you individually as an author. What works for me won't work for somebody else necessarily. So.
That's an interesting point. And Louise, you've talked before about the fact that you didn't necessarily set out to be a best-selling author. You hadn't got a sort of business plan in mind. It was something that occurred to you. And at what point did you sort of begin to think, actually, I do need to treat this as a business?
Well, I think what I would say is that I didn't have the expectation of success because, nobody, anyone who isn't sort of the most conceited person in the world thinks like that. But, as you're writing it, and perhaps by the time I'd sort of, spent some time on this and thought this could really actually pull together, I'm about to finish a novel, who knew, I think at that stage, I was really looking at it with objective eyes, or trying to, as far as you possibly can anyway. And sort of thinking ahead, it's a big learning curve, if you're approaching an entirely new industry, which for me publishing is, And also, I think it's slightly different as well to people who perhaps have been trying to write their first novel for years and years and years, and it's been a long-term dream. Whereas for me, this was a second career, and it was something that I hadn't really allowed myself to consider until later in life, So it was sort of, it came quite quickly, I would say. And so I was having to respond quite quickly. So I think that regardless of what the approach is, very quickly you have to just tell yourself, approach this professionally. Otherwise it's not really going to work for you. And I think that applies to every element of it, from the writing to the editing to the covers to, even things like the book description. And actually, it's interesting, but I don't really think that differs very much across the type of publishing that you choose either, because whether you're going into a physical bookstore and looking at the back jacket, or if you're looking at the description or whatever on the Amazon Kindle store, it is still the same thing that's selling the book, except the difference is possibly slightly harder on the Kindle store, because people can read the first 3 chapters as opposed to a quick flick in a bookstore that people might do because it's not a library, you know. So I think actually you have to really focus on that content from the get-go, and really sort of particularly on those first 3. But it's worth possibly mentioning as well that if you have signed up to things like Kindle Unlimited, you know, it's very incentivizing to make sure that the quality is consistent all the way through, because you know, as an author, you are given a percentage of pages read. So not just monetary-wise, but also in the sense that you don't want to disappoint readers. And it's a marketing tool in itself that you are increasing visibility of your books through that. So from every aspect, actually, you're looking at it for quality and content, and balancing that against your own enjoyment of
And when you got to the point where you thought, actually, I may have stumbled on something here, there's potentially a career, did you then at that point sit down and plot the whole thing out, or did you deal with the challenges as they came along, like the tax issues, like accountancy, all those sorts of things?
Like I say, I think you have to respond quite quickly, or as quickly as you can. I think probably, so my first book was published 1st of January 2015. We are less than 2 years later, you know, so it's quite a curve, and we're on to book number 5, which tells you how quickly books can be produced to a quality standard, and not be curtailed by traditional publishing schedules necessarily. So, you know, there is very much a sense that you can, if you are fortunate enough to capture a readership first time out of the blogs, then, you know, there is an opportunity there to really work on that and to encourage them to read more of your work. So there's a huge sense of simply writing more and doing more of what you enjoy. But as you say, there's also a sense of balancing that against all of the other business issues that you have to do. And I think that very quickly just, you know, got on board with all of that and carried on.
Okay, thank you. And Mark, you've obviously spent a lot of time today talking about mailing lists, your Facebook campaigns and things. Did you first approach those as a sort of like a necessary evil, something that you just had to do, or was it something because you really enjoyed that element and found that there was a way of really sort of enjoying that element of the work?
Mailing lists, I think I didn't do it originally, and I missed some early tricks with not having that set up right away. So I remember, for example, this was like 5 years ago, that my first book, self-published book, I put it out over the weekend, had an Amazon 3 free days over the weekend, and it was the harvest time. I'd gone for a ride on my bike, and I took my phone out, checked the downloads, and I'd had 50,000 downloads. And I had no other books and no way for readers to contact me. And I think I realised at that point that I might have not taken advantage there as I could have done. But things like Facebook ads, not many people were doing them when I started doing them. So it wasn't because I felt I ought to be doing. I thought it could be quite interesting. I had a couple of, you know, I started doing them. They didn't work very well to start with, but then I worked out what I needed to do, and you know, I was seeing 3 or 4 times return on the investment, and that was, you know, when I called my accountant just to run through them, because when things are too good to be true, you know, they often are too good to be true. And I just ran the numbers by him, and he said, "That sounds, put more money in," basically. So I did, but yeah, I didn't have any plan. I think I kind of just lucked onto that kind of stuff.
And Hazel, obviously, many authors now, especially independent authors, are considering the hybrid option and maybe publishing traditionally as well as independently. Does going traditional mean that all of the business things disappear, or do you still have a business element to maintain as an author?
Absolutely. You know, there's very little difference from that point of view, and I think it kind of makes me cross, you know, when you hear people who say, one day I'll get a real job, you know, and writing is sort of dismissed as this pretend job that people do, and it infuriates me whenever I hear people say that, and writers say it, and it makes me really frustrated. I mean, I think, you know, we've all had a different career. This is all a second career, and certainly for me, I think, don't tell my previous employers this, but this is the hardest I've ever worked at any career. And I think it's because there is that creative passion behind it. And ultimately, you are putting out your product, your book, your creativity, your beliefs, your emotions in that product. And therefore, I think we all care very passionately about that. So I think you can't distance yourself from that as a business. It's really hard, actually. In my traditional publisher now, they're surprised at how interested I am in sales, in marketing opportunities. I constantly have that business hat on, I think, because I've come from a business background. That's naturally within me. And they're often telling me, don't worry about that, leave that to us. I'm like, but I am worried about it. I do worry about it. And I think I'd be inhuman not to. A lot of blood, sweat, tears, and I will mention it again, gin, do go into all my books. So I want them to be the best books they can be. And it's interesting, when Louise was saying you write a book, and of course you secretly or not so secretly hope that it's going to go on and do great things and achieve all those wonderful things we see other authors whom we aspire to doing. And you just don't know. You just have no idea. And if only we had a crystal ball. And when I decided to independently publish The Girl Who Came Home, that was on the back of several rejections. I was going against everybody telling me it wasn't good enough, but it was good. But it was more to do with the timing, as I was talking about earlier. So you're really taking a leap, because the experts are telling you this maybe isn't quite right. But most books that aren't quite right, it's not that they're not a good book, it's they're not quite right for that traditional publisher at that time, which is why independently publishing is so fantastic. And I said, if 10 people read this is better than it being on my laptop and driving me insane. And it also creatively freed me up to write the next book, because I was spending a lot of time and emotion getting rejected by this book, and I had to do something with that book because I really believed there was a readership. And I think using independent publishing is a great way to creatively free yourself up as well to write the next book. So that's a very long way of saying that, yes, I think whichever route you take in, I think you're doing yourself a disservice if you don't also invest in that business side of it as well, because I think you owe it to yourself and your book to know as much about this as you possibly can in order to give it the best shot.
And so, Mark, treating it as a business, presumably there's a temptation that you have a business plan, you have a structure. Do you then start writing to the business plan, or does the business plan get driven from the writing?
You're assuming I have a business plan. I don't have a business plan. I'm not as organised as that. I've got a kind of, I think I'm quite instinctive, so I tend to do what needs to be done as I realise it needs to be done. So typically that's writing the next book. So I'm just finishing the 10th in my Milton series now. The next one will be what I'm just also finishing up a book I'm having published by Amazon Publishing, in my Beatrix Rose series, and my readers will also tell me what they want next. So that they want another Milton book, so I'll probably write another one of those. And I one of the real beauties of publishing this way is you can be completely flexible and adaptive. So if I decide tomorrow that I want to write something else completely different, I'm not beholden to anybody. I can do that if I want to. But my readers might say, we'd like a Beatrix Rose book, Mark, and in which case I can probably get that published in 2 months. So if I did that traditionally, it would be 2 years. So there are so many benefits. It suits the way my mind works, I think, just to be able to go with the flow.
And is that the same for you, Louise? Is the writing first, or do you have a plan in mind as to how you're going to build a business out of this that you fit the writing into?
I don't so much have a business plan, no, not in that sense. I think what I do sometimes think is I have several ideas running at once, and it's mostly just the problem is not having enough time to do it all at once. So say you have an idea for 4 or 5 different books, some of which might be part of the same series that you're writing. Currently, I'm sitting here thinking about the next series that I'm going to write, which I know that I'm not going to be in a position to write practically for months and months and months. I've also been thinking about a standalone book for quite some time now. In fact, the whole of 2016, and that still isn't written. So, so it is just a question of looking at commercially. It's made more sense for me to capitalise on the DCI Ryan series, which is also a pleasure to write. It's no hardship, and it's just a question of what to prioritise at the right time. So because people have been enjoying the DCI Ryan so much, I think to myself, well, I enjoy it too. Great, win-win situation. So I'll just carry on writing until I feel that I've reached a natural pause in that. and at the moment, I'm on to book 5, and I can sort of, in my mind's eye, I can picture maybe another 1 at the moment, which I may or may not write in the early part of 2017. But it's also a natural pause at the end of book 5, so it frees you up to move on to the next stage. So I think that what I would say is, although I don't have any formalised business plan, I think that there are naturally peaks and troughs in your career that sort of give you an indication of where you should go.
Interesting. Yeah. And is that the same for you, Hazel? When you're thinking, when you're writing something, are you immediately thinking, here is a book from a traditional publisher, here's a book that I'm going to publish independently, or you just write it and then decide from there which way you're going to go?
I think writing the book for me is always first and foremost. I think if only we all had a grand 10-year plan and knew exactly what was coming. Yeah, I think for me, it all starts with the idea, and it's what is it I want to write? What makes me passionate? What wakes me up in the middle of the night? What do I bore my husband talking about? Because I have to get that out. And for me, my genre is historical fiction. I'm sticking with historical fiction. That's what I love writing. That's what my readers are engaging with at the moment. And I think when you're trying to establish yourself as an author, developing that brand, if you want to call it that, is really important so that you get loyalty. Readers know what they're going to get when they pick up one of your books. But of course, there are naturally other areas that I'm really interested in exploring. I'd love to write a children's book. I've promised my children I will do. They'll be grown up by the time it's written, but maybe for their grandkids. I've written a short story for an anthology. I'm co-writing a novel with an author in the States, which is a really new experience. And I'm always looking for ways to try new experiences. How that book then finds its way to the readers is really a secondary thought at that stage. You know, it's about capturing that idea, telling the story, doing that to the best of your ability, and working with an editor. You know, as we were talking about earlier today, not every idea makes a good book. So it may be that you have an idea that's not quite ready yet, but you might come back to. And there is always that option of having that hybrid approach. And I know a lot of authors are doing that now, that they maybe have one brand with a traditional publisher with their own name, and then they might use a pen name to independently publish a very different brand of writing. And I think that's fantastic, because really all we want to do at the end of the day is get our words out and into readers' hands. And I think it's a fantastic place we find ourselves in now as writers, that we have lots of different ways of doing that. You know, and I always talk to aspiring writers about being flexible in your goals and your aspirations, and maybe the way to get where you want to be isn't the route you thought you were going to take, but be flexible and adaptable along the way. And ultimately, readers will always find good books. So we just have to keep writing them.
So you focus on getting that good book written and then decide, okay, here's how I'm going to try and get that published, and then go from there.
Well, when I started, obviously I didn't have a route, so I took the decision to self-publish because I wasn't getting success the way I thought I was going to traditionally. Now I'm with a traditional publisher at the moment. That's working for me. So that would be the natural relationship that I'm in at the moment. You know, but it's great to know that there are options out there for people, and nothing's ever, you know, I suppose, set in stone, and there's always going to be different routes available for different parts of your writing career, and hopefully I've got a long career ahead of me, so who knows what's around the corner.
Excellent. And Mark, you talked about the fact that you're the CEO of your own business. Is that a multinational corporation? Are you thinking about readers around the world? Are you focused on the UK? Yeah.
Most of my sales are in the States, so 80-20 in terms of where my readers are. I've sold foreign rights to traditional publishers in Germany, Italy, Czech Republic. Spain are interested. I've done a film deal with a very well-known producer in Hollywood for one of my series. So yeah, and audio books. I mean, I've done a deal with Audible Studios, another Amazon company, and ACX. So the way I look at it is, I have in the morning I'm writing a book. In the afternoon I'm selling a thing, an asset or a widget. Even it doesn't really matter. But those that book has lots of different subsidiary rights that can be exploited, and I don't like leaving opportunities or money on the table. So, if it means I can sell the book around the world in translation, that's great. That can be quite lucrative. Audio is a really big emerging opportunity for authors right now. So yeah, I try and push it as far as I can and make it work as hard as I can.
And are there any consequences of operating internationally that authors need to be aware of? I guess your accountant deals with tax and all of those kind of things, but are there other elements that you need to be aware of before you can do that?
No, not with Amazon. I mean, the Kindle is basically you upload it and it's worldwide, unless you don't want it to be. Very, very easy. Nothing more needs to be done. Yeah, there are tax interviews that you need to take. The American system's a pain in the neck. Sorry, Americans, if anyone's watching. That needs to be done. But yeah, it's pretty straightforward, I think.
And Louise, have you been able to sort of spread your brand internationally? Have you found readers around the world?
Yes, so as I say, we're on to the 5th book now, and so far in English, it's made it across. It was the first 3 books were 1, 2, and 3 in like Australia, and they've made it, to parts of Europe and kind of India and stuff. US, I think we did sort of fairly all right with Holy Island, but it's an emerging market. I think that's something that I would, again, as a business decision, would need to look at perhaps the branding of that to cross over into the US market, and that's actually on my to-do list for 2017. So yes, I'm mostly the opposite of Mark in the sense that it's UK, Europe, Australian market there. In terms of other things, yes. So I actually used Amazon Crossing, another Amazon company, to bring out a German edition of Holy Island, which did really well as well. So that's fantastic. And I think that's something, again, it's sort of, for me, we're 2 years in, and it's all happened very, very quickly. So it's all still emerging in terms of foreign rights, which is fantastic as well. So that's kind of all onto the to-do list. Audible, again, which is fantastic. So the first 3 books are already out in audio. Book number 4 is coming out on the 6th of December, and book number 5 is already, will be made as well. So that's fantastic that all of the formats are available for people as well, because it's about accessibility apart from anything else. So in terms of how that affects me, managing that side to it, it's all been incredibly smooth, to be honest. I have an agent, and so from time to time it's useful to ask him to help with certain elements of that. So say in relation to Audible Studios, it's nice that I can just say to him, would you mind just organising the contracts with that? It's just another way of freeing up some time for me, although I would say that you're perfectly capable of doing it yourself as well. So don't worry about it if you don't have the benefit of an agent at the moment, because it is in this business about being a bit of a go-getter as well, and it's about having the confidence to maybe just put yourself out there a bit. But to be honest, if you have enough confidence to actually just release your book into the wide world, then you can mostly do anything after that, because that's the most terrifying part out of the way, I think.
And to Mark's point around sort of exploiting the intellectual property that you have you had advice about that? Have you just done what you've wanted to do? Or somebody said, actually you should think about international rights or translations or whatever it might be? No,
I mean, I've mostly just done what I wanted to do. But I mean, fairly quickly you can start to see what's available, and sometimes when you are just looking at other authors' profiles or other authors' websites and see what's available out there at the moment, and leverage that yourself and think, well, actually maybe I should be looking at foreign rights, or perhaps I'll start thinking about assessing if say for example your book does well in Australia but not in the UK, for example, you might want to ask yourself why that is. Is there a different readership? Is there a different audience? What is it that you can do to sort of tweak things to make it more appealing to different audiences? So it is, again, coming back to being responsive like that. But it's not so much that anyone in particular said this is what you should be doing now. I think that it's a matter of common sense. It becomes, apparent what is next on the list.
And Hazel, obviously, you've seen both sides of the sort of the process, as it were. We've talked a lot about how authors are changing and getting involved in the business side of things, or whatever. How do you think the industry is changing? What are the sort of trends that you think authors need to be aware of in terms of how the business side is developing across the industry?
Gosh, that's a good question. It again goes back to thinking about this as a business, that we do all need to be aware of what's happening, and audio is probably a big thing at the moment. Seems to be really emerging as something readers are really attaching to. And you know, how involved do you get in that? For example, I've found myself listening to, I suppose, show reels of potential actors to be cast in my audiobooks. So again, it's these little add-ons that as an author you're not always aware are going to come down the road to you. So the result of audiobooks becoming increasingly popular may mean that as an author you're suddenly casting 2 or 3 actors in the right roles for your book, which, you know, is great fun and a great responsibility. And it's, I suppose, just being aware of what might be coming down the line and being, as I said earlier, being adaptable. I mean, I think when we all started off, nobody gives you sort of a list of things that are going to happen. You know, and we've talked about having business plans, and it really often is a matter of learning as you go. And as you become more established, as your books reach a wider international audience, the demands on your time to respond and react to them in different time zones, to schedule your social media so that you're not just hitting the UK and Ireland, but that you're hitting the States when it's 3 o'clock in the morning and you should be in bed. So it's learning as you go along and adapting as you go along. So I suppose working with a traditional publisher now, I would be very much led by them in terms of what they want from me as an author. At the moment, it seems to be very much write the best book you can write, and then engage as much as you can. I think engagement with readers is not going away as something that publishers and you know, as independent authors were expected to do, and that we need to keep adapting and adjusting to that. Yeah, so I'd very much be, I suppose, directed by what my publishers require of me in addition to writing the book, but not letting that distract from writing the book, because that's your job. That's a big part of the job, is to get that book written.
And do those changing trends impact the creative side as well? So are you researching software to help you write? Are you researching sort of tools that will help you do your background research? Or have you got certain ways of doing things and that's what you stick with?
I'm not one for really reading rules about writing. I've always felt very stifled by that. So I tend to steer away from reading about the job of writing, because I think you often learn more by just getting on and writing. Obviously, a lot of my writing being historical, I need to do a lot of actual research in order to write the book. So yeah, I think you need to know your brand. You need to be aware of where you are and what your readers are expecting from you, and just try to do that to the best of your ability. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And is that the same for you, Matt? You've talked obviously about your publishing career, the various different ways in which you've published, and you've talked about things like Facebook mailing lists and things like that. Are there other trends that you can see over your sort of publishing career, as it were, that are starting to emerge that you think will inform how you operate in the future?
I see traditional publishers still pricing ebooks ridiculously highly, which I bring it on because I'll undercut them every time. So, yeah, you get an ebook for $20. Fine, I'll sell mine for $4.99 and beat them on volume. So you see that sometimes. I think that is a trend. It's just let's not get political about it, but I do see a lack of, almost a lack of the inability to see the way that things are going, and you know, traditional publishing is reacting quite slowly to the threats that Amazon has unleashed on the marketplace, and it gives, you know, nimble indie authors the chance to do quite well in the margins that they've left. So I think that might, I think it is, they are starting to realise now that author platform is important, and they're starting to do things like mailing lists, and I see quite a lot of Facebook ads that look quite like the ones I did 18 months ago in my Facebook feed. So they are starting to adapt, but it's an amazing time to be a writer at the moment. There's so many opportunities out there.
And Louise, is that you've talked about the fact that you're 2 years in, you're up to book 5. Are you still enthusiastic about it? Has it settled into a sort of, here's the day job, I've got to do my sort of 9 to 5, or is it still very exciting?
Oh, no, absolutely. Still can't believe my luck, to be honest. I don't think that it's a feeling that, it's unlike any other. I mean, for me, having come to it as a second career, I think I appreciate it perhaps more because, with the first one, it was long, inflexible hours, and it wasn't really what I wanted for the rest of my professional or personal life. And, with this new business, although, yes, you spend a lot of time on the business itself, even that said, all of that said, you are so flexible with what you can do with your time. I can drop my son off at school every morning. I'm there to pick him up every night. There's no question that if he were ill, that I could just drop the manuscript and go and pick him up. There's none of that side to it. So I'm incredibly grateful for all of that flexibility that it's allowed. And so no, I haven't been disenchanted by any of it, really. I mean, as with any job, there are parts that you enjoy more than others. But I think that that's natural. And like Hazel was saying, and Mark as well, the writing is the passion, and that's something that really drives everything else. But I think it's also the most basic principle of the marketing as well, that actually your content has to be all there, otherwise you have nothing to market, So it's actually just one and the same as far as I'm concerned. So, when it comes down to it, and you have a day where maybe you're really struggling to write something, or, it's not flowing, everything else is just feeding back into it and actually coming back to reading, or, the passion that really sparked the reason why you wanted to be a writer in the first place. All of that is useful and actually, again, feeds back into it because, say in my genre, so murder mysteries, thriller, crime thrillers, it's useful to read other bestsellers that are coming out now. It's useful to have an understanding of what people are enjoying. I say it's useful. It's not necessarily something that you want to try to emulate, but it's something that's good to be aware of, and good to be aware of what people are currently enjoying, and actually to see whether there's something about that you enjoy too, or it's something that you're looking forward to trying yourself or whatever. So there's no part of it really that isn't fun. It's just to one degree or another.
And Hazel, I can imagine for many aspiring authors that have spent some time crafting a novel, trying to make, or a book, trying to make it as good as they can, may well think of the business side as slightly alien and slightly off-putting. Do you have, for those aspiring authors who are just starting out, do you have any sort of words of advice, any key learnings that you can give them?
Well, I would always say finish the book is my first piece of advice. Without that, the rest of it is irrelevant. So, I do talk to a lot of aspiring writers who have lots of half-finished books and lots of ideas. And I would always say, finish that, because actually just the process of finishing a book in itself, Mark was saying earlier in one of the other panels, it really is a moment for self-congratulation and a pat on the back. And it's a real achievement. And I think for me, just to know, as I said this morning, I had my very first novel, which is hidden under the bed and will never see the light of day. But just to understand what that process felt like, to find time in a busy family life when there's no guarantee anybody was ever going to read that. And I think that's when you're starting out, you have to be very stubborn. And I think you have lots of self-belief in what you're writing about, because you don't know if there's ever going to be a readership. And I think independently published books are a testament to that determination, because you will find a way to get that book into readers' hands. So absolutely stick with it. Don't be deterred by some of the other aspects of the writing career that you may not be as passionate about. I know some of my friends absolutely really don't feel comfortable public speaking, reading at events, doing the more public facing side of the job. But it comes with the territory. And I think if you're serious about it, you have to take a little bit of the rough with the smooth. And I think there are we're in a really unique time, I think, as writers. There are so many different facets now to the job of being a writer. I think everybody, imagines we lounge around on sofas with our caftans and just have people fetching us things and limos to pick us up. And sadly, it doesn't happen. Not every day. So it goes back to what I was saying earlier about writing not being a real job. It's a hugely real job, and the business side of it really can't be detached from that. So I do think, no matter how much you like it or not, I think you cannot avoid it. And just to read widely, to understand the industry. And that's why I think days like today are fantastic, to come and hear people from all sides of the industry talk about the industry. You know, I would always say to aspiring writers, go to book launches, go to conferences, go to events, hear how the business works, go and talk to agents, editors, publishers, whoever you can get some information from. Arm yourself with all that knowledge, and then nothing's as much of a surprise. And I think Dublin Ireland has a fantastic writing community. There are endless amounts of opportunities to do things like this. And it's difficult to juggle family and home, and I know people will have had to put all sorts of things in place to be here today. But guarantee it's always, always worth it. And it will always help to elevate your confidence, your understanding of the business, which will then help you have the success I'm sure you want for your book when it's finished.
And Louise, if somebody was just about to publish, or maybe last week they pressed publish and they're thinking, okay, now I need to take care of the business side of things, what's the first thing you think they should look at?
Oh, I'm not sure there's just one thing. Well, I think I said in a previous panel, say you've already made the decision about the platform that you've chosen, you've made the decision to, I don't know, sign up to Kindle Unlimited, you've ticked the boxes, you know, and you've kind of gone through that process. I would then double check it, so I would download it and make sure that it's reading all right. I would then sort of look at all of the other processes and make sure they're in place. If they aren't already, if you weren't organised enough to maybe have all of your author platform in place, quickly get that in place so that when people are reading it, say they've just downloaded it today, you know, you've still got time because they're reading it as you're sort of sitting twiddling your thumbs. So get online, sort yourself out, and make sure that you've got something professional waiting for when they reach the end of the book. They say, this was fabulous, you know, where do I go to find out more? And that you have things available for them to see. I would say sort of start thinking about how you can press on for the future. Don't give yourself too much time to sort of overthink things, because you know, you'll be constantly refreshing the page for your sales and how's this book doing, and you know, oh my goodness, should I be changing this already? Just leave it alone. Step back and start thinking about maybe the next project, because that's the best way to just kind of press on, and then as the reviews start coming in, you can respond to those and you know, keep checking back on how that first book's doing. But I would say just really sort of look to the future. Don't worry too much about, you know, some of the fear that might creep in. As soon as you've released something into the wide world, first of all, congratulations, because that's actually quite difficult to do. As Hazel was saying, she knows people who, you know, you have a book sitting there for 20 years or something and nothing ever happens to it. So you've already done the hardest part. But then it can be a little bit daunting to start having those reviews coming in and have the response. And, you know, fingers crossed it will all be positive or mostly positive. If it's mostly positive, you're doing amazingly well, because you can't please absolutely everybody. You know, it's an impossible task, and it's unrealistic to expect that as well. So don't be put off if you have the odd negative review, because that happens to everybody. And you can always then go online and look up Tolstoy or something like this, or another, you know, Hemingway, and see how many negative reviews that he has and make yourself feel better, you know. So, you know, I would say that stay brave is what I would say to people.
And Mark, for that aspiring author who maybe thinks, I have some money that I'd like to invest. I don't have a huge amount of money, but I'm looking to make some first steps in terms of investing in my career, spending some money. What would you suggest they do?
Cover, pro edit. I think those are two kind of quite important steps. A website, which you can have. WordPress is pretty cheap. You could get that set up, even if it's a basic one that you've done yourself. MailChimp is free to start with. Get that set up. I think that would, you occasionally see some stats going around that say that, you know, it's going to cost £4,000 to self-publish. And that's without the predatory companies I mentioned previously. That isn't true. You don't need that much to do it. You can get a good pro edit, a good cover, for a fraction of that. But I think if you have a little bit of money, then it's a wise investment to make sure your product is as polished as you can make it, and those are kind of like minimums, I say.
Well, that sounds like a great starter kit for the process. Do we have any questions? Anything on social media, Vanessa?
We've got a sort of few round-up questions now, and I think we can probably take those from the audience at this stage in terms of the fact that it's nearly the end of the day. So if anybody has questions that we haven't covered, we have got a few coming in. Lots of people want to see it. The main questions coming in is when can they see it again, to be honest. So that's down to editing and all sorts of things that we have to work out. Yeah. And not one we can answer right now. So perhaps if we can ask the audience what if they've got any other questions right at the end of the day now.
Any questions from the floor?
Anything we've missed?
Yeah, the gentleman at the front here.
On the subject of yourselves, Mark and Louise, you write ongoing series with the same characters. Hazel, your books are all standalone, as I understand it. My own books would be like I decide I'm writing a trilogy or a quadrilogy, and I build it that way. Were your decisions based on what you happen to personally want to write, or the general tropes of your chosen genres? Like, was it a business decision or a personal decision?
I'll go first. No, I think that it became a business decision very late in the day for me. It was really. I think that another aspect of the writing, this is where the writing cap comes back on, is you have to try and be authentic, because readers are wonderful things that they can always tell when you're faking it. So I think that you have to try and tell a story that is authentic in that sense. You can't fabricate necessarily the third in a trilogy if there's nothing else to write. If the story is done, it's done. So that's something to bear in mind. That I think that readers can be quite irritated if something comes out and they think, well, that was, say, half the length of the previous book, or it seems really forced, or something like this. And I think that that's kind of, it's ethical as well, isn't it? It's something that you wouldn't do anyway. But say you do have a genuine story to tell, and it's to do with, I think with a series, it's mostly to do with the characters that draw people in anyway. So if you have ongoing characters that naturally can, form the basis of new stories, and it's not a hardship to try and do that, then it's quite easy. It's a question of how much inspiration you have, and it's not so much a business decision, it's just the pleasure of it, and how much you're enjoying those characters, because it can get to the stage from time to time where you think, well, I'm just sick of the characters, and I need a change, that's all. So that's just a creative pause, but they're always there, and as long as you've established them, you can always come back to them. It's a question of what you really feel like, I think.
Is that the same for you, Mark?
Yeah, I mean, creatively, it's you can write faster if you write it in a series, because you're not building a world every time you start a new book, and it's much easier to market a series. So in terms of a business decision, if of course you can market standalones too, but it's much easier to market a continuing series, because you're hooking people with the characters at the start, and then you hope that they'll want to continue the story with the second, third, fourth books. And advertising is easier for a series as well.
Mine have just come from just pure passion about each subject, and I have lots more in my head. So they're not connected through character, but they, I hope, would all feel familiar enough that you would know you were reading a Hazel Gaynor book in terms of their historical setting. And without intending to, I've sort of moved forward in time. And as we're moving forward in time, so I'll always be writing about the past. So, I've always came from a passion for the subject or the era first.
Thank you. Any other questions? A gentleman in the scarf?
Louise, you mentioned earlier having kind of several different ideas. I find a huge problem is procrastination by idea jumping from one thing to the other. And I'll write on this and then I'll write on that. Have you any advice on how you actually just get into the mental space of sticking with one project?
Well, yeah, it was a bit of a light bulb moment for me. I thought that I was a really good multitasker. Turns out I'm not. Sad times. So, I'd have to kind of focus on one project at a time. I know people, however, who are capable of, jumping between two. And likewise, even just writing one book, I think Mark was saying, in a previous panel, you can write sort of non-sequentially, you can sort of skip it. I'm not very good at that at all. I kind of have to just sit down and just plough through in a really linear fashion. And if I'm stumped, I'm stumped. I'll just have to plough through it, So that's kind of, everyone's different like that. But I would say it sounds very basic, keep a really good notebook. So if you have a good idea, the mind, as you get older as well, is a terrible thing. You will forget, it's more likely, and life's busy. So make sure that you write a detailed note of whatever idea that you have. And I think it's something that Hazel said previously as well, a good synopsis of the book, what your hook would be for that future book. So that when you then come back to it at a later stage, you can immediately jump straight back into the idea, and you're setting yourself a really adequate note for that. And that's all you really can do. Try to shut out other aspects as well, but it's the same as you would do with other elements of the business. So if you're constantly hearing a ping from your social media, well, turn it off until you've finished. So it's just that simple. Just put it in a drawer, write a detailed note on it so that you can come back to it and fall straight into it when you're freed up to do it.
I'm working on 2 books at the moment simultaneously, which is a whole new experience. And what I'm finding works is I have certain days of the week committed to one or the other. So when I wake up and it's Monday and it's my own novel I'm working on, that's where my headspace is. On the days where I'm working on the co-written novel with my writing partner, that's where my headspace is. So I'm able to leave one, in as much as you leave behind the books you've already written and you clear out the space. So I move from one day to the next, and as soon as I wake up and I'm at the desk, I'm in that place. But the social media distraction is, if that's something you engage in, no, see, you're better than us. I have a thing, I say, distraction free till 3. And I fail, but I try to not have social media pinging at me whilst I have that writing time while the children are at school, because it's a really precious time for me, and then I can let loose. So, but if you see me tweeting at 10 o'clock in the morning, feel free to berate me publicly.
Okay, and I think, are we done? So
I'm
time has caught up with us, so thank you very much to our expert panel. Thank you.